Hi, everybody. So most of the time when we're reading these portions about the brothers, we tend to compare and contrast Yosef and Yehuda, Joseph and Judah. Both are the prominent sons, the sort of front runners towards the leadership. But I want to look at a different relationship, a different comparison that caught my eye this year in reading the portions. And that's the comparison between Yehuda and Reuben. At three major junctions, there's some kind of family conversation going on where only Reuben and Yehuda are speaking, and their words, and therefore their characters, seem to be juxtaposed to one another. Once is at the selling of Yosef, where we really only hear from Reuben and Yehuda personally, who both offer kind of alternative solutions to killing Yosef. And it's Yehuda who ultimately gets followed and listened to. Then in Egypt, we have two different opportunities where relating to Binyamin, where Reuben and Yehuda speak. And we have these conversations with Yaakov trying to convince him to allow Binyamin to go down to Egypt, where both Yehuda and Reuben offer solutions to their father, but ultimately Yehuda convinces Yaakov and not Reuben. Now, in each of these situations, all of the brothers are there, and we can imagine that a lot is actually being said, but the Torah specifically records again and again these two brothers speaking, as if to show us that there are two kinds of maybe models of being and models of leadership. Now, when we think about it, Reuben is, of course, the oldest. He is the Bechor. He's the, seemingly the one who should be inheriting Yaakov's blessing and the leadership. We know that often the second son is chosen instead of the first son, but Yaakov doesn't seem too happy with Levi and Shimon after the Shechem, we can call it fiasco, the Shechem occurrence. And so the next son in line is Yehuda. So we have these two characters that are the candidates for being the true leaders of Israel within the Yaakov-Leah family, and that's Reuben and Yehuda. I want to compare what we are being called to put together from watching these kind of two juxtapositions of these figures, these two different kinds of personalities, approaches, philosophies. They're the models being offered of the leadership, and one is ultimately chosen as the leader of Israel. So what does that have to teach us? So let's back up a little. Let's look at Reuben. Reuben in these situations is showing kind of one posture, one spiritual, emotional posture. And maybe it's just me, but I can't escape this feeling that there are these awkward moments after every time Reuben expresses himself. Each time he makes this grand suggestion or proclamation, and there's this sort of awkward silence that follows. No one ever really rallies behind him. But each time he seems like righteous, like he's really trying his best. Why don't his ideas ever land? And because if we can understand that, we can understand why he didn't ultimately become the leader of Israel. His tribe didn't ultimately become the leader of Israel. So in some way, that thing that he represents is something that was not supposed to be the fundamental idea guiding the people of Israel. So let's go back to these stories. When the brothers want to kill Yosef, what does Reuben say? He says in chapter 37, verse 22, he said, let's throw him in the pit. He said, do not shed blood. Throw him into this pit here in the desert. Do not lay a hand on him. What is he saying? Reuben is suggesting that, he wants to rescue him and bring him back to his father, but he doesn't want to say that. So how does he present it? He presents it in some kind of weird, moral sterility. He's making some kind of distinction between actively killing someone or just passively letting him die in the pit. Now, we know that he really intends good, but he doesn't have the moral leadership vis-a-vis his brothers to actually say that. So he says, why don't we just let him die in the pit? We don't want to have our hands sullied with blood. The outcome will be the same. He'll be dead. Don't worry. But at least we'll have some sort of plausible deniability. We don't actually know what happened to him. We'll keep our hands clean. Now, at first they do what he says, but there's also this super awkward dynamic because we as the readers know that they listened ultimately to Yehuda and decided to sell Yosef to Egypt. But Reuben comes back to save him in the pit, and he's not there, but he's shocked. Now, that's an awful moment, but I don't think we really actually internalize how awful this moment is. I don't think we actually catch the full awfulness, because what does that mean? It means that he totally missed and was left out of the conversation when Yehuda made his suggestion of selling Yosef, meaning they're all talking and consulting one another, and he is out of the loop. He's out of the picture. Now, if you follow the meaning of this to its end, it's actually insane because it doesn't say anywhere that they ever actually told him that they sold Yosef. When they go back to Yaakov and say, Tarof Taraf Yosef, that Yosef was eaten by an animal, and they show his bloody jacket, Reuben might actually have no idea that they're lying at that point. So not only do they not take his opinion under advisement, they might actually be tricking him just like they're tricking their father. Meaning his moral status in their eyes is really just not very impressive. They don't see him as a leader or even as a person whose opinion is respected enough to be taken into consideration to confide their dirty little secret to him. And we can actually see this in the next place where we see Reuben speaking in chapter 42, verse 21, because the brothers are doing this soul searching and they're taking responsibility and they're saying, "Oi, all of this is happening to us because of when we heard our brother crying and we didn't listen to him." And then Reuben responds to them, "Did I not tell you? Do not sin against the boy, but you would not listen. And now we are being called to account for spilling his blood." Here we see he actually thinks that blood had been spilled, even though actually that never happened. Meaning he might very well be under the impression that Yosef was just accidentally killed and he never actually found out that he was sold. No one even responds to him. It's another awkward moment. No one really knows what to say to him at this point. And so there's this uncomfortable situation where Reuben is making this dramatic pronouncement to the rest of his family, and then no one actually says anything. Yosef, meanwhile, is hearing this, and he goes to the side and cries, but he's not taken enough by this situation, by this proclamation, to think that he's, to be satisfied that it's time to reveal himself. And what's painful here is that it's just kind of like an "I told you so" moment. They're all doing this soul searching and taking responsibility and saying, we've really done the wrong thing. Imagine if he would have said, "Now this is a great time to do tshuva. We have to figure out how to make this right." Instead, he goes, "I told you so. I told you we shouldn't have spilled the blood. You didn't listen to me. I'm good. You're bad." Instead of saying, "How do we make this better?" And anybody who's ever had the pleasure of saying "I told you so" knows that it's not a small sense of satisfaction. It's a meaningful sense of satisfaction, but it doesn't actually do anything. So he's like wrestling with his own guilt and paralyzed by it, not doing anything productive with it, just trying to make that bad feeling go away and say, no, it wasn't me. I was okay. This is all on you guys. And then we again see Yehuda and Reuben having these speaking moments in 42:37 when they need more food. Shimon is in jail, but they can't go down without Binyamin. So Yaakov says, "No way, I'm not sending him." But they really need food. So Reuben says, "I'll take him down. If anything happens, I'll kill my 2 sons." He says, "You may put my own 2 sons to death if I do not bring Binyamin back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I promise that I will bring him back to you." That's in verse 37. And it's another awkward moment because on the one hand, it seems like a really good-hearted suggestion that he's trying to find a solution that will allow everyone to replenish the food supply. But also his father should see from this how dedicated he is, right, to keeping Binyamin safe. But when you actually look at the suggestion, not only is it sort of morally off, like, do we really kill 2 innocent children if something happens to somebody else? But it's also a little bit socially awkward. It's not tapped into the situation. Yaakov has lost 2 sons. Yosef is gone. Shimon is gone. He's also lost 2 grandsons. Er and Onan, the children of Yehuda, have also died. And so lackadaisically throwing around the possibility of losing another 2 grandchildren, how would that help Yaakov anyway? So this seemingly good-hearted suggestion doesn't really get much credit. It doesn't really convince Yaakov to do anything. And so they continue to just be hungry until eventually Yehuda will ultimately convince him, as we'll see soon. So now what is the common thread between all of Reuben's appearances here? He seems, I would suggest, to be primarily focused on trying to avoid the unpleasant feeling of guilt. He starts out saying, "Yeah, let's not kill him." He speaks to that part of all of us that doesn't want to experience the bad feeling of doing something wrong. The brothers don't want to see blood and guts. Okay, so he's not offering any kind of moral alternative, but really just avoidance of a bad feeling. Let's let him die and just not have to actually see that. And then with Yaakov, when he offers to kill his 2 sons, it's not really any kind of moral high ground once again, but some sort of demonstrative grandstanding. "Oh, I'm going to feel so terrible if Binyamin doesn't come back. You can even kill my sons." Meaning in both of these situations, he's offering no actual solution, but basing everything on just this sort of fixation around his guilt. essentially you can see that he's almost paralyzed by his guilt and wanting to avoid guilt, that no one really takes him into account. No one, he's concerned with the purity or impurity of his own actions. He doesn't sweep anybody else up. He doesn't actually bring anyone to any meaningful decisions. And I have to say that I deeply identify with Reuben. I often find myself, when I've done something wrong, just completely paralyzed with feeling bad about it and trying to say, well, maybe it's not my fault. Maybe it's your fault. Maybe it's somebody else's fault. Oh, I knew we shouldn't have done this. I told you so. And just dwelling upon this. And I, of course, come by this honestly, because Jewish guilt is like a well-known stereotype for a good reason. And I have this ongoing argument with Jeremy, my husband, who says, no, guilt is a bad thing. Look how it paralyzes you. And I say, no. Guilt is a good thing. That's the voice of my conscience. And he says, but look at you. You become paralyzed. You punish yourself and you're of no use to anyone that way. But while I see where he's coming from, it sometimes makes me say to him, like, are you spending enough time with my bubby, or any Yiddish bubby for that matter? Because like, if you like Jews know, like, you're supposed to feel guilty and say, oh yeah, I did everything wrong. But the question is, how do we channel these bad feelings in a productive way? Maybe that is what Yehuda is coming to teach us. I would suggest that Yehuda is the sort of mirror contrast to this Reuben way of being in the world that's just fretting over his own guilt and what he's done wrong. And Yehuda comes to say, what do you do when you have these bad feelings? You stand up and take responsibility. Let's look at Yehuda. Yehuda, when Yosef is in the pit, makes this suggestion of selling him. Now, he's so interesting because he starts out by making a suggestion that everyone listens to, but it's not a perfect solution. It would have been very nice if he could have said to his brothers, listen, let's just let him go. Let's all play nicely with one another. But I think like Reuben, he understands the brothers are not in that zone. They're not in the mood to hear of any kind of reconciliation. So if nothing else, at least in his leadership moment, he takes responsibility for Yosef's fate, even if it's not a perfect solution. And he says, you know what? I have a better idea. Let's sell him. And everyone listens to him. He saves Yosef by doing that. He is willing to take responsibility and give an imperfect solution. He's going to have to carry the moral burden of that. And it's not a pretty solution. It's not something that he can be terribly proud of, but at least he's carrying that decision, that difficult decision, on his shoulders. And then again, with his father, when they're really needing food and they need to bring Binyamin down, Yehuda says something that's so interesting. He says, I'll take responsibility. Why? For the continuity of the Jewish people, because look at what the verse says. It says, then Judah said to his father, send the boy with me and let us set out and go, so that we should live and not die, we, you, and also our little ones. He's saying, for the sake of Jewish continuity, for the continuity of the Jewish people, for that us not to starve, I'm going to take responsibility. And what does he offer? If Reuben offered to kill, for his sons to be killed, what is Yehuda offering? He says, I offer myself as a guarantee for him. You can demand him from me. If I do not bring him back to you and present him to you alive, I will have sinned against you for all this time. So he's saying, I guarantee the boy. What does that mean? Why does that persuade Yaakov? Doesn't Reuben's offer seem at least symbolically more convincing? Like his own two sons, that's like real dedication, right? It seems more profound than just saying, yeah, it's on me. I got it, Dad. I got it. It's on me. But for some reason, that's persuading Yaakov more. Why? So it took me a while to figure this out. But I think that actually when you look closely at the words, the hints are all right there. Because what does he say? In Hebrew, the words he says to guarantee Binyamin returning is Anochi Arvenu Lach. I will guarantee him. That word Arvenu, to guarantee, we see also in the story of Yehuda and Tamar. She says, how do I know you're going to pay me? And she uses that exact same root word. She says, give me an eravon. She goes, and he says, take my staff and my seal as eravon in chapter 38, verse 17. Same word. What does that mean? It means you keep something of mine and you're going to keep it until I pay you. You know that I'm not going to go anywhere without this deal being sealed and coming to its completion. I'm taking responsibility for the payment. And indeed, when she shows up and he's accusing her and he's upset with her, and she takes out his staff and his seal, and he publicly takes responsibility. He uses the exact same word when speaking to his father about Binyamin. It's like he's reminding his father of his own shameful story and saying, you know me. You know that even if it takes me being publicly humiliated, no matter what happens, no matter how bad it is, I take responsibility. I'm not perfect. I make bad choices. Sometimes I've done things that I'm not proud of, but I never let that paralyze me. I never let that stop me. I make the situation right. So who is the eravon? Who is the guarantee here? If in the story with Tamar, his staff and his seal were the collateral, who is the collateral here? He says, it's me. Reuben says, if I fail, I'm going to feel so bad. I'll make some kind of horrific symbolic punishment of myself. Yehuda says, failure is not an option for me because I am the collateral. I will not come back. I am the staff and the seal. I will hurl myself into the line of fire and not fail. I will not fail you. And that's what convinces Yaakov. And then we see that actually happening because when we get to the last situation with the goblet and Yehuda speaks up, that's actually what happens. Because what does he say? He says, be Adoni, it is on me. Take me instead. I am the collateral. He will swap Binyamin out because failure to keep his word to his father is simply not an option. How he feels is not the issue. Reuben doesn't offer this. He's busy feeling terrible, but trying to blame other people. And maybe it's me, maybe it's you. He can't actually figure out what is the leadership thing that needs to be done. Yehuda is the one who can step forward and take responsibility for the situation. So I think these two sort of parallel lines of spiritual postures are showing us a subtle difference between guilt and the fixation on guilt and feeling bad and not wanting to feel bad versus responsibility. They're so similar because both of them recognize what is morally right and wrong and want to be doing the right thing, but one of them is paralyzing and the other one is motivating. When you look at Yehuda, he becomes the leader of Israel. Why? Because it's easy to take the moral high ground, to point out the problems, say I told you so, and be, fretting over how do I punish myself? How do I make myself feel better? But the Torah is not a story of the Jewish people just always having the moral high ground and doing the right thing. The stories of the Torah and the stories of the book of prophets are primarily stories of a people constantly making terrible mistakes and then their subsequent efforts to take responsibility for them and fix them. And it's so real because wouldn't it be great to have a Bible that said, hey, look, there's these people, God revealed himself to them and then they did the right thing and look how great they did. Look how well that went for them. The end. That would be nice, but it's not real. We are the story of a people that often goes wrong, but we're constantly trying to fix ourselves. If we look at the stories in the books of prophets, we see two lines of kingship. Take, for example, Shaul and David. Both of them made mistakes. Both of them sinned. Why did Shaul lose the kingship and not David for his sins? Was it for the sins or was it for the response to the sins? Shaul is constantly trying to avoid the bad feeling by saying, no, it's his fault. It's your fault. The people did it. There was some reason or the other why I did this wrong and always busy in trying to make sure that he can just avoid that horrible, paralyzing feeling. Whereas David courageously faces his misdoings and says, okay, I did the wrong thing. But then he commits to doing tshuva, commits to fixing things, commits to taking responsibility. That is the fundamental underlying story of the Jewish people. We are a people that gets it wrong, but constantly we never give up from trying to fix ourselves. We don't lose ourselves in the guilt of our misdoings, but really actually try to dig ourselves out time and time again. And it connects so deeply to the story of Hanukkah because there are a lot of messages in Hanukkah. And we talk about the candles and the miracle of the oil, and we talk about the courage of standing up, small nation to the Greek Empire. But there's one story that I think doesn't get nearly enough attention. And it's a very profound story. It's in the book of Maccabees 1 in chapter 2, and they're corroborated in other stories as well. It says in passage number 35 that the Greeks were coming to attack the rebel Jews that were hiding. And it says, but they did not answer them or hurl a stone at them or block up their hiding places, for they said, let us all die in our innocence. Heaven and earth testify for us that you are killing us unjustly. Why? Because it was Shabbat. The early rebels against the evil Greek Empire, they didn't want to fight on Shabbat. And then it says, so they attacked them on the Sabbath. And they died with their wives and their children and their cattle to the number of 1,000 persons. And then when Matityahu and his family and his friends learned of this, they mourned for them deeply. And each said to his neighbor, if we do as our brethren have done and refuse to fight with the Gentiles for our lives and our children, they will quickly destroy us from the earth. So they made this decision that day, let us fight against every man who comes to attack us on the Sabbath day. Let us not die as our brethren died in their hiding places. So there was this Reuben kind of attitude. We can't dirty our hands fighting on Shabbat. We need the moral high ground. We need to be guiltless. We need to be blameless. The Maccabees who maybe uncoincidentally would ultimately be led by another Yehuda the Maccabee, say, no. Just like biblical Yehuda facing famine that was threatening the continuity of Am Yisrael, the Maccabees say, we will fight on Shabbat. It's not the perfect solution. We don't have prophets that tell us it's okay, and we won't get any kind of punishment from Hashem, but we are responsible for the future of the Jewish people. We need to fix this. We'll bear the burden of whatever that means, of getting our hands dirty and doing things that don't always feel morally right, but they are what needs to be done in the broader perspective of what is needed for the Jewish people. And that is the first time that the Hanukkah story actually turns around. They're losing, and that's like the first time where it's like there's actually like a turn for the good, because no one was willing to take responsibility and make a difficult decision and put their souls, their eternal souls, on the line to do what was right until the Maccabees came and made that decision. And that connects us to our modern times of what morality is. I think everyone probably saw there was a big controversy over Google's AI because it was asked, if you could prevent nuclear war but you had to misgender somebody by calling them not, their preferred pronoun, what would be better? And the Google Gemini said it would be better to allow nuclear war than to misgender someone. Why? It's exactly like the Reuben and Yehuda dilemma. It's immoral. You have to have the moral high ground. You have to not hurt anybody's feelings. You have to maintain your moral purity, totally not taking responsibility for the fate of like the people that would be damaged by that decision and the fate of the people around you. A perfect example we saw just actually right now, there was an Islamic terror attack in Germany on a Christmas festival, and you could see the efforts in the media to cover up that this was actually jihad. My favorite was a Canadian minister saying that this terror attack highlights the dangers of Islamophobia and hate speech against Muslims. Really? Is that what it highlights? Like, we're so bad, we're at fault. Really? That immobilizes us from taking decisive action that needs to be taken. So I don't think there's, I don't think there's anywhere more that you can see this than in the international treatment of Israel, as Israel is taking responsibility to protect ourselves and ultimately the world from genocidal jihad. It is so easy to sit with your suit in your office in the UN and say, oh, did Israel do enough for humanitarian aid trucks? Did you use the most precise weapons? How comfortable it is to take the moral high ground and say what everyone else is doing wrong when you have zero responsibility for what that will actually mean. And Israel itself is not immune to this impulse. I would argue that the rift within the Jewish people in Israel goes precisely down this fault line between Reuben and Yehuda impulses, between guilt that says we have to be so careful not to cause any casualties on the other side. We have to give warnings. We have to be so cautious. We don't want anything bad to happen because we're going to feel so guilt. It's this paralyzing impulse that says just give up. Don't fight back because we might do something wrong. It won't be aesthetic on the news, right? Versus the Yehuda in us that says first and foremost we take responsibility to ensure the safety of those who are responsible, which is first and foremost the Jewish people in Israel. And even if it requires imperfect solutions that don't always seem to be, they're not pretty on the news, even if it means doing something that might not look good. Failure is not an option when Jewish continuity is on the line. And in a lot of ways, that's how we got to this point, because people who didn't want us to shoot on rioters on the Gazan border or people shooting missiles into Israel ended up being completely lulled into paralysis on October 7th. So in this portion, I think we're being called to be Yehuda. Yehuda of the Torah, Yehuda of the Maccabees, Yehuda in our personal lives, and Yehuda as the people who say that we will never again be paralyzed by fear and guilt, but always motivated by a sense of responsibility to the future and well-being of Am Yisrael and ultimately for the entire world. Bye, guys.
Hey, this is Jeremy Gimpel. If you enjoyed that content, then you will enjoy all the content on the Land of Israel Network at www.thelandofisrael.com. And if you want to take it up a level, you can join our global community of people that learn together, that work together, that are all a part of a global movement of over 1,000 families all over the world, and you can join the Land of Israel Fellowship. Check it out on thelandofisrael.com.